We will call the special meeting to order. If I could have roll call, please.
Councilman Darzinski.
Here.
Higgins.
Here.
Kelsey.
Here.
Murphy.
He's coming.
Yeah, he's coming.
Parkinson.
Here.
Mayor Carnes.
Here. Purpose of today's meeting is to have a study session on the LP Pride program, or the ordinance enforcement and such. I think it would be proper to start off with Chief Waters here to do his presentation, or a little presentation about what the program is about.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to just explain to everybody what the program does. It might answer some questions. It may not answer some of their complaints, but it will certainly answer some of their questions, I hope. So currently our Ordinance Pride Department is staffed with 3 ordinance officers and 1 Pride coordinator. The ordinance officers respond to reports of tall grass, abandoned vehicles, report of rat problems, trash, debris, property, maintenance, and they also handle all of our animal complaints and parking enforcement. How are the calls reported? Ordinance calls are assigned to each ordinance officer as they come in through the Pride office. Also lobby complaints through Central Dispatch and other city departments. Animal complaints are also called in through Central Dispatch. They're brought in through the station lobby and through the station and lobby, and they're also dispatched out to the available officer at the time. So how are they dispatched? The Pride coordinator assigns the ordinance officer, calls out to each officer. A worksheet is provided for each call with a description of the complaint. The officer goes out to the assigned call and investigates the complaint. If a violation is located, an ordinance letter is left at the dwelling or property business explaining what needs to be done or fixed. How much time do we allow them? If the resident owner of the dwelling has 7 days to fix the problem for weeds and debris, 3 days if it's a repeat offender, 48 hours for abandoned vehicles, and 24 hours for snow. And if a citation is issued for violating it, it's handled through the 25th District Court. Follow-up, the ordinance officers will go back to the location 7 days after it's been tagged or letters left. If the work still has not been completed, a work order will be given to our city contractor. The contractor has 72 hours to complete the work. The homeowner's billed for the completed work. All unpaid bills are placed on the property taxes with interest and penalty. And if the officer follows up on an abandoned vehicle that has not been moved, it is towed, a citation is issued, and the vehicle is impounded. Parking enforcement is done every day. Each day a different end of the city is targeted. Normally we follow the same route as the street sweep / garbage day for parking. Animal complaints. On top of the ordinance and parking enforcement, the ordinance officers also are responsible for taking animal complaints. In May, they responded to 121 animal complaints. Restructure. So in May, the ordinance officers went out on 755 calls. They issued 112 violations. But we still noticed that even with that amount of work completed, we are still falling behind on parking enforcement and ordinance calls. So starting Monday, June 25th, we changed the work schedule for the 3 ordinance officers. They now work Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. rotating. The old schedule wasn't providing enough maximum coverage for parking and ordinance enforcement, and we'll continue to monitor these results and make adjustments where needed. So I got some questions from council ahead of time. I felt like some of the questions I received were answered through just explaining what was going on with our program. But one of the questions was, should officers' discretion be taken away from them and just have one standard way of operation that everyone follows? In my opinion, no. Officers need to have discretion when they're working with the public. Another example would be if a neighbor calls on the other neighbor, their grass is getting too long, ordinance officer comes out, investigates. As it turns out, this particular neighbor is someone that actually does take care of their lawn on a regular basis, but they were, ill, they were in the hospital, they were on vacation, and just, they didn't have an opportunity to do it. So we like to be able to work with those people. Those are people that go out and do their work. So with discretion, obviously, then it's not enforced, but they're advised, and then they usually take care of their own stuff. Are some properties put on a regular cut schedule? Yes. So after 2 consecutive cuts by our contractor, which means our ordinance officer goes out, they tag it, 7 days goes by, they don't cut it, we go back out, it's a repeat offender, they get 3 days, they don't cut it, so that's the second cut. After that, we put it on a 10-day rotation. So which means our contractor will go out, they put it on their list and cut it every 10 days if needed. And they inspect it and let us know if it needs to be cut. We start we call it an abandoned list. It doesn't necessarily mean that the house is abandoned, it just means that they're not maintaining their property. So we start the list fresh every year so that someone doesn't get stuck on a list that may have moved, and we have new homeowners move in the spring. So our list starts over in the spring. Right now, I think we have about 6 homes on that list right now. What happens if an ordinance officer is on vacation or sick? Do we fill those positions? No, we don't. We don't have enough manpower in a city to pull from the police department or from the DPS to fill those positions. So unfortunately, when they're sick or they're off on disability or some other issue comes up, the other officers have to make up the work. And that's part of the problem that we came into a couple months ago. We had 2 officers that were on disability. It left us down to 1. When all 3 came back, obviously they were a little behind on calls, and then we got hit with a lot of rain. And then the spring growing season came in, and then here we are. So they're doing what they can though right now. Another question that comes up quite a bit is why is city council members patrolling? Why can they see the blight but the ordinance officers can't see it? Well, they do see it. They're out patrolling for problems, and they are responding to calls. Unfortunately, some calls do get by. We have council members that go out and patrol and give us a list when every once in a while. When we get that list, I would say probably 70% of the calls that we receive or complaints are already being addressed or already in our system to be addressed, but there are some that don't. So that's how this system works, though, is people calling and complaining. So we appreciate that, and we try to get those calls done as soon as possible. Another question was, who answers the Pride phone on the weekends? Well, we don't have a person that works the weekends in the Pride department, but we do have a voicemail. So we advise people that if you have an issue with your neighbor or you see a business that you think isn't addressing their issues, then definitely call, leave a message with the Pride department, and we'll get out there and take care of it right away. Now, if it's an emergency issue, then obviously you can call dispatch, and we'll send somebody else to take care of it. But for the most part, Pride issues aren't exactly an emergency. It's just something that needs to be taken care of. And that's my short little explanation on the Pride Department ordinance. If anybody else has got any questions, I can answer them.
Chief, does the department still review the charges that go to citizens that the contractor will do? Or is that no longer handled by your office?
Does it what now?
I'm talking about you want everybody to hear then, all right. Say the Pride goes out and cuts the grass, and then a bill is submitted to the homeowner. Does the police department review those bills first?
Yes, we get the bill sent to us, yes.
Okay, to make sure that what is say somebody goes on to this cut list, do you know what the average cost is for a regular lawn cut to be done?
I'm not 100% on.
It's like $70 or $80.
Okay, and then if they don't pay that, then it goes on the taxes, right?
Correct.
All right. Now, your guys also, and young ladies also work animal control. Has the location of the animal shelter, whether it be in Wyandotte or Taylor, has that added to workload problems also, as far as delivering dogs and such?
It has added to a little bit of the time of their day when they have to go out to Taylor. It's a little bit further than what it used to be, so it adds time to their day when they have to drop an animal off.
And if one animal person is out doing that, then and an animal call comes in, then the other ones would respond because all 3 are trained?
That's correct.
Okay.
have a
would
question, Your
like
Honor.
to, yes, Council President, go ahead.
The mayor made up a point about the cost, and you review those as a police department before they get sent to the court. How is the court working with you? I've heard stories of the court dismissing cases. Is that something that happens on a regular basis? Or, I mean, if you go to the trouble of looking it over after it's been done and you take it to the court, is there some reason that they would dismiss it?
We haven't had any issues with the court dismissing large amounts of tickets or violations. Actually, we work hard with the court. We actually we have a meeting every 2 weeks. We call it a blight meeting. And one of the members of the blight meeting is one of our prosecutors. So we work very closely on attacking the blight within the city, and we work very closely with the court. But we haven't had any issues with them dismissing. If there's an issue where they think something's wrong, they'll normally call us, but we haven't had any issues with that in a
Glad to
long
hear it.
time.
Thank you.
Your Honor,
Yes, sir, go ahead.
you brought up the fact that you have 3 officers and we had a problem, if 2 are off, one has to cover everything. Then you mentioned vacation. Is it set up where their vacations can't be taken at the same time?
They can't take their vacation at the same time, but they can maneuver days off together. One could be off on vacation, one could be off on a regular day off.
Okay.
Your Honor, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yes, sir, go ahead. Ma'am, sorry.
The dates that the calls come in, is there a cutoff for that particular day? You know, like, are you gonna give a call that comes in at 3 p.m. a date for the following day?
If it's coming in at 3 o'clock, it's probably going to be sent out the next day, unless it's something that's a house that we've been having issues with. Yeah, and unless it's a slow day and the officer can come in, then we can assign it right away.
So for record keeping though, is the date on it the date the call came in, or is it the date it was assigned?
The date the call came in.
Thank you.
Your Honor?
I think Councilman Kelsey was next.
Yeah, I had a couple questions, if I could, through the chair.
Yes.
I sent some questions in to be answered, too, and I guess a couple things that come, I don't know, to myself anyways. We had some properties that, obviously, the grass was way high. I don't know why they fell through the loop, because one of them was on there for like 3 years, and then the other property, I guess, I don't know if it's the Pride contractor or it's the fact there's a disconnect, but the Pride contractor, from what I understand, is not supposed to, per the contract that we have, is not supposed to put this, and I don't know who, first let me back up, who oversees the Pride contractor? I mean, do you guys have somebody that makes sure that they do what they're supposed, I mean.
So what happens, so they go out, they cut the lawn.
Right.
Before they cut it, they'll snap a picture of what it was before and after.
Okay.
And then they give us the picture to show that, with the address, it shows that what the house looked like prior, the reason for the cut, and then what happens afterwards. You know, the description afterwards.
All right. The reason I'm asking is because some of the properties, first of all, one of them was and I'm just being specifics, but there's in general, there was a house for sale right across from the church on Riverbank there, and obviously it had a for sale sign right up there, and the officer, whoever it was, put the sticker and put the white paper, I guess it's a summons or something, or what, I didn't even look at it behind there. But nobody ever called 3 or 4 days or even longer afterward. The grass still wasn't cut, and then they finally cut it, and they didn't pick up some of the branches, but yet in the contract it says they will charge if there's debris or branches, they have to pick it up. That's why I asked the question. And if they snapped the picture, then it should have shown first of all, how high the grass was, which is way over the regular thing, which means it fell off someplace. And second thing is, how do they notify somebody who's not there? Because nobody was going to that house to pick that piece of paper up or pick up that ordinance or read that ordinance sticker that was on there, because nobody cut the grass, so yet it was for sale house. I mean, I guess what I'm saying, do they just leave the stuff at the house if it's abandoned or if nobody's home, or do they attempt to contact like a real estate company or to see if the house has got an owner where if they're not around, it's abandoned, and it has to go on that list you're talking about where they cut it every
Right.
so often. Yeah.
So first thing in the morning sometimes they'll have calls like this where it's They know the house was a rental, and the renters are gone.
Right.
And sometimes the landlord doesn't know that they're gone. Maybe the renters may have been responsible for cutting the grass, or it's a house that's for sale, no one's living in it. So they'll come in the morning and try and do their research in the first thing in the morning and find out who the homeowner is, and if things need to be mailed out to them, then they mail it out to them.
Okay.
Yeah, but nothing is just left. I mean, it's not fair to anybody, because
No,
it's
that's-
never going to get corrected
Right.
if we don't find out who's responsible and address it with them. And one of the other ones that was on your list,
Right.
I can get with you later on the address, but our contractor drove by. It was actually on our list, our 10-day list, and called and said, I'm not going to cut it. Somebody's cutting it. I don't know if that someone bought it, so we haven't had a chance to research it, but they tore all the bushes out. They've been cutting it, and the contractor said this is about the nicest the house has looked in a long time.
Well, that particular house is through the chair, is the one that I talked to the city manager about, and actually DPS went over there and tore all the bushes out and all that. And the grass was cut, I believe, by Pride finally, but it was like yay high from the thing. And the contractor doesn't do bushes, I guess, or trim things, which is whatever. And the city manager sent DPS over there, and they gutted all the bushes and cleaned it for 3 years. It was sitting that way where it hadn't been.
So that house has been on our list before.
But it fell off somehow
Well,
because.
every year, we can't just assume that that the house is still under the same owner. So come spring again, in case someone moves out and we get a new owner in, it's not fair to automatically start cutting someone's lawn. You understand what I'm saying?
Understand,
So
but-
we wait, if
Okay.
we go through the system again, now that house is on our 10-day cut. So the contractor went out and said it was clean. Obviously, she didn't cut it and she wasn't in charge, but she's supposed to go back out in another 10 days, and if it's long, which it very well may be if no one's taking care of it, then she'll cut it again. But that one is on our list.
Well, I was just surprised because just driving around, even a contractor, because a contractor is Pride, they do evictions as well as everything else. They can see the grasses, and if it's one of the ones on their thing, they can drive by and see that first of all, that the grass is yay high. I guess what I'm trying to say, the time limit is what I got a problem with. The time limit between the fact, and maybe I'll get with you later, but somehow there's a disconnect between the time limit because the house shows up, but somehow it never gets to and not all of them, but it doesn't get to the cutting, then the grass is yay high, and then a resident calls and says, hey, there's a sticker on there, the grass is yay high, how come somebody hasn't cut it yet? And then when we contact it, usually Doris will say, I'll put it, and they go out and cut it. And then when they cut it, it looks like a hayfield, because when they cut it, they just cut it and leave it there.
So I agree. I have seen a couple pictures where
that's
they
all I'm saying,
leave,
yeah.
and they can only lower their blades so far. So we're going to talk with them next week and see if there's something else that they can do as far, when they get the real long ones.
Right, the real long
And that's
ones.
usually this time of year.
I have a follow-up question, if you wouldn't mind.
I was just going to end with the fact that they've been blowing the grass out in the street too, which is not cool, and I guess, I don't know if that's why I ask who follows up on the contractor, or who checks on the contractor that drives by, maybe not every house, but a couple houses, and says, okay, we got the pictures, but I drove by and the pictures show what they did, or before and after, because it seems like, what I'm saying is that some of this stuff is just, is not, it's in their contract not to do, but I notice it, and I'm not, I do my thing, but I do drive through the city, and then the resident notices it and calls up, and the first thing he asks me is, we're not supposed to throw it in the street, because we're not supposed to, and I go,
No, I agree, and so that's
all I'm asking.
No, so next week, they're out of town right now, so when they get back into town, we want to sit down and explain to them. They work very well with us. Any problems we ever have, they work very closely with us, and they're very accommodating. So I'm sure this could just be an oversight on their part, but we'll just explain to them that we have to tighten it up and do a better job, that's all.
Let me just,
Go ahead.
if I could just add that that contractor is also the grounds contractor for the city.
Yes.
And if you remember, we had some issues earlier this year in the medians where they were actually throwing the grass into the street. I know John, I believe, had spoke, pardon?
Go ahead.
John had spoke with them about that as well, so it shouldn't be, it's against the city code to do that. They've at least been told they shouldn't be doing that, but if we have to keep following up, that's what we have to do.
In a second, we're going to go to Councilman Parkinson first. No, you were finished, but Mr.
When,
Higgins wanted to follow up. Go ahead.
When the ordinance officer writes up a whole house, does he go back in 7 days to look and see if it's been done?
Yes. And right now, because it's so busy, our contractor's actually assisting us with that.
Because last week, there was 4 different houses that they should have been noticed a long time ago. Yeah, it's a shame. If you're gonna sticker a house, then disappear for a month, that's ridiculous.
Well, I don't think
Maybe
any
it's
of
a
them.
glitch in the system, but I'll tell you what, no, it's been done. It has been done. I can give you the addresses.
Okay.
And how many, do you write tickets for these offenders?
Yes, they do.
Because I know of a few habituals, and they do it every year, and all I do is turn over and get it cut.
Yeah, and we need to be more consistent on writing the tickets, because it seems that when people get hit in the pocket is when they start to realize that this is the problem, and they start to fix the issues better. But we need to be more consistent on writing the ticket.
Well, the reports we get doesn't list if it's got a ticket, it just says turn over to contractor. So I'm gonna have to get with James about if a ticket was written, so we get more information about what's going on. But a lot of those houses, one's on a main street. If you drove by there, you could see it for the last 3 years. It was ridiculous. If they was tagged and they kept driving the main street, I'm sure they drove on it all the time, then it should have been noticed. So, I mean, it's totally ridiculous that the house was like that. Thank you.
All right, Councilman Higgins?
Yeah, my follow-up question to what Councilman Larry said. You go to a house, it's empty, you put a sticker on out. When does the 7 days start?
That day,
The day the sticker goes on?
right.
Your Honor,
You finished, sir?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I've got kind of a follow-up question too. You said that you begin anew every new year. You start from scratch on those abandoned lists. Wouldn't it be better to continue on where you left off and write up a property so that if there is new people in there, they would know they have a problem that they got to fix, rather than just
Well, no, we don't want to start off on the wrong foot with somebody. If you just buy the house, we got a tenant or a owner that's not doing a good job, and then he leaves and a new tenant moves in, they may not have, depending on what time of the year they move in, we just don't want to go out there, we want to follow it the right way.
Or are we still giving a warning on these things?
No, we start from the beginning. So we go out, we inspect the house, they get 7 days. Cut it. If it goes the second time, it's 3 days, and then after that, it's on our list.
Well, I guess what I'm wondering is if you're giving a 7-day notice, what would be the harm of just on those abandoned properties, giving the person there that notice so that they know they got 7 days to clean it up, and if it's the old people, just go ahead and ticket it. If it's somebody new, then they know that they're going to solve a problem by fixing it.
And that's something we could look at, yeah.
Yeah, and I think there may be a little bit of disconnect in between the conversation here, because I think, what the chief is saying is that, we're not pre-noticing people and putting them on the cut list before the first time that, in the next year, the first time that the grass exceeds what the limitation is. But if it exceeds what the limitation is, they do go out and notice them right away. So I think what you're suggesting is that we should just notice them even before the season starts, or?
No, I'm saying make it a continual thing. In other words, if they're on the abandoned list and they buy a property and it's in such a state that it needs to be noticed, that you're going to get a notification on it, they know that we're watching them and they got 7 days to fix it. Otherwise, the neighbors may have to wait 2, 3, 4 weeks before we finally catch up and say, we should have done something with this.
A possibility would be to take the homes from 1 year and then check them, put them on an automatic
Yeah.
Yeah.
where they are checked by the ordinance officer, not an automatic cut, so that the neighbors wouldn't have to continually call if they've been calling 4 times a year before.
Your Honor,
Yeah, we can certainly do that.
Yes, sir.
make a habitual list, because I know some right in my mind are habitual every year. So if you're not gonna do all the houses, at least you write a habitual list, so they know which ones to go and look for.
When the ordinance officers are out, they're given their litany of calls that they go on. How many houses do they average in the course of a 8 or 12-hour day?
They did 755 complaints in May. Sometimes they're averaging, depending on the day, 30, 35, maybe 40 complaints, something like that.
But each complaint requires them to go by at least twice, correct?
Yes.
Okay, does that count as 2 complaints, or is that's just one?
No, that's one complaint.
The one complaint, and then no matter how much follow-up is done by them.
Correct.
In case of abandoned autos, they may have to go back twice.
Yeah, yep, yes,
Go
sir.
back a second time.
Second time.
And in the case of all the tall grasses and everything, they have to come back a second time.
Correct.
So your list of calls, then they're actually double of what the number you presented.
They can be, yes.
I got a question through the chair.
Yes, sir.
You know, because of some of the, goes back what the mayor just said, we have a high volume, and I guess my question is twofold. Do we need to hire some more ordinance officers, or what do we do when they're not there? Because for that, God forbid, they go on workman's comp or they get injured or off for a month. Nobody does that. So when the resident calls, it's already been a month. We give them the 7-day notice. It's been 7 more days, 3 days for the contractor. That's 10 days. We're almost talking 5 weeks. That part's not going to get done because we don't have the replacement. And I don't understand that. I mean, it's not like we don't do that every day, and I think the volume that the chief just says, we have it there. The work is there. It don't go away. I mean, as a matter of fact, that's why we're having this meeting, because we have some glitches in the system that have been really outstanding that we're talking about. How do we address that as a city, I guess is my question. I mean, if we got so much that we're doing, by the own admission of the slides there, we're doing dogs, we're doing the issue of parking, we're doing the issue of grass, we're doing the issue of dogs. I mean, we go on and on. I mean, I know I drove by, and this is a side issue, but I drove by 4th Street and seen a car parked on the sidewalk, and I mentioned it to the city manager, and it was there 3 days later, and nobody mentioned it. Now, that's a regular route that the regular patrol cars go by, too. I know you're not supposed to park on the sidewalk. I figured when the ordinance officer, I don't know if they do just request, but I mean, they drive by, and I'm not trying to be smart, but they see something that's out of the ordinary like I am, at least you would think they would notice it. I mean, that's on the main thoroughfare. And that's my question. Do we need to have one more ordinance officer, because we do have a high volume and we're trying to keep the ordinances up? And what do we do when we have somebody that's on vacation if they've got seniority, they got 2 weeks vacation, then nobody does that job because we don't have a replacement? Do we have a patrolman do that, or how do we do that? I guess that's 2 questions I have, is that what do we do? I mean, it can't go with undone, because then we get the complaints as elected officials, and the city does. It says, what are you guys doing? And we tell them, well, there's nobody doing the job, and they go, well, who's taking the replacement? We say, nobody. I mean, I'm just making...
You handle the cases as best that you can, but similar to calls that come into the Detective Bureau that require follow-up and things of that nature, you do them, you try to prioritize them and do what you are able to do. The police department is short, the fire department is short, the DPS workers would also like to have more manpower to do the things that they want to do. So that's where we'd have to handle that in the budget presentation, I would think, or in preparing for that. If that is what our priority is to add a person.
Yeah.
I mean, they all could need some more. Yes, sir.
Through the chair, I wanted to ask the chief, would it be good for us to have kind of like a cleanup man? In other words, someone that would be running if someone's on sick leave, if somebody is off for the day, or if someone's on vacation for 2 weeks, that man would just jump in, man or woman would just jump in and do that person's job right away, rather than have the citizens wait for 2, 3, as Councilman Kelsey said, maybe 3 weeks to get it done. You know, the main problem we have in our city trying to grow it and make it valuable again is blight. And we need to have people that are willing to get out there and do that. And if we don't have enough people to do it and to fill in on those off days, the city's the one that's being hurt, besides the individual homeowner that has to live next to it.
Yeah, I don't know how that would work to have somebody not work in the department all the time. And really, the busiest time of the year is right now. You know, it's May, June, and July. It actually, end of July, because of the heat, the grass starts to slow down. So it starts to, their calls, the tall grass calls start to slow down.
Seasonal help?
So it's really just those few months.
But seasonal help?
Well, you're talking people issuing violations, having to present themselves at court, and the whole 9 yards. It's not an easy job in which they do. I mean, they have to.
Correct.
You have to run lean. You have to have all access to to the department's computer system. You have to be cognizant of how to do the reports and how to do the data entry.
Correct.
So you're talking
There's a
about-
lot more to it than having somebody come in once or twice a week for 2 months. It would take them a while just to figure out the computer system.
Well, actually, I was thinking more filling in full-time and just being there to, I mean, you got a lot of calls, obviously. They would be there to help reduce the call load on each one of the officers. And their specific job would be to fill in for someone who is on vacation or sick or taking a day off. But I mean, they would still work a general shift to reduce the load that you have during.
So you're talking about hiring another full-time person then?
Yes, at least for, I would say, between April and October.
So a part-time person?
Part-time person working a seasonal job.
Part-time. So again, there's a lot to training somebody that's only going to be here for a couple months.
Do you have enough workload that you could use an extra person?
I think, like the mayor said, every department in the city could use another person.
Well, in the police department, if you have somebody call in sick, you have another officer work overtime or come in to do that work. Why wouldn't we do that for this?
Well, because there's a cost to it.
There's a cost to not doing it.
Because the officers come in and on time and a half in order to do that, and this is, you need to have the police and fire because that's life. I mean, it's public safety. It's a matter of life and death. You have to have the people on hand and to do that. So if you're willing to pay the price, now if you wanted to have additional people that were trained, one, you'd have to look at what the bargaining unit for that group has, because you can't just bring in people willy-nilly, because then you have the labor issues with that. It's just not a possibility. Now, whether you can take people that would be at the Department of Public Service and train them to be in a situation where they could fill in the case of an emergency or somebody goes down, I would imagine that would be a possibility. But then you're taking people away from the DPS and the jobs that they're doing, whether it be water and sewer and everything else. Both of those groups are in the same bargaining unit. Is that correct? The DPS and
That's correct.
And the ordinance officers?
That's correct.
Mayor, we had,
If I can finish. And then you could cross-train those and then have somebody step in case of you have a guy on vacation, a guy that's off on disability, and say the third person has a death in their family where they're not available. At that point, we would have to have somebody come in and do animal and handle that. So that may be a possibility. Yes, sir.
Mayor, we had talked about having an additional person in the building department that would handle those duties. And I'm just wondering whatever happened to that, or are we still looking at doing that? And could that person fill in the lag time that, is created when we don't have someone on the job because of a vacation or a sickness or a day off?
Was that the CDBG
No.
program that we were looking at?
No. No, the greater plan is to consolidate the Pride into the building department. It's something that once we've been working through a number of issues to get the building department where we need it to be. So that doesn't start failing on us. I mean, if you haven't figured out, there's a lot of work going on with LP Pride, and to put that on a system where we're trying to rebuild effectively from a very low level to be able to service the way we should be servicing. The plan still is to do that. I think once we have that, it would make more sense to look at hiring and adding a body there rather than in DPS, because I think, in the long term, you'd be taking bodies away from an area that we need bodies now. We don't have enough people, so I think that's probably not the best way to go. My concern is scalability, because, again, if we look at the way that the call volume comes in, what can we get by doing efficiency things first to make people more efficient before we start adding full-time people? So, I again, looking at the numbers that I'm looking at, our biggest issue, our single biggest issue is rental properties. We get that under control, the call volume will go down. I mean, just here, in an 18-month period, 4,400 calls for service for LP Pride. 2,200 of those are rental properties. And a lot of those are repeat. And so, you know, reducing that call volume because people are not, you know, that are making money off a property are not doing what they're responsible for would have a tremendous impact on reducing the labor costs for the city to do this. Plus the fact that, you know, we're spending, almost $60,000 a year that does go on to the taxes, but, you know, we may not see those for 3 years potentially. You know, that's a lot of cost to our homeowners that we shouldn't have to spend, because people, I mean, in the end, this is the responsibility of people. You know, everyone here, you maintain your properties. The vast majority of residents maintain their properties, but for whatever reason, you know, the rentals are causing us issues.
Your Honor,
Yes, sir.
the thing that I'm trying to get at, one of the biggest problems that we have, you're talking about the rentals. One of the reasons that people hesitate to make a home here in Lincoln Park is because they look around at, maybe it's rentals, maybe it's somebody else is not taking care of their property. And we need to deal with that. You know, it might cost us, we might have to wait a few years to get paid because that's how long it takes. But if we don't do that, we're gonna have more and more people that say, I don't wanna live in Lincoln Park. They don't keep their property up.
Yeah, and I'm not disputing that. I you know, what I'm saying is that, you know, this is not just, the cost is not just adding another person. I mean, there's a lot more costs that we're experiencing because people are not, you know, living up to their responsibility. And what I'm saying, one of our strategy is, you know, we don't want to send the Pride officer out. I mean,
Right.
that's our goal, is that, you know, if we get to that point where they don't have any work to do, would be what we're looking for, right?
Yeah.
And so there's things that we can do through the rental process that we're working on right now that will incentivize people to maintain their properties, so we don't have to send someone out to knock at the door and say, hey, you have to maintain your properties. And so what I'm saying is that right now, if you look at it and say, okay, let's add a full-time person, that's based upon, you know, a 3 to 4 month issue we're having, you know, every year. Not ignoring that. But then you have to say, okay, now what are we going to do? Because once that wears out, you're going to have a fourth, you know, potentially a fourth blight officer out there. And so the strategy, I think, is short-term, long-term, is not to get tied up with another full-time person just doing blight, because I think if we're successful, we're not going to need all that labor force to undertake it. But we have to have it now. And so I think that's kind of the struggle we're having, how to achieve that. But again, I think it's our responsibility to do that. And you know, the chief knows that we go out and we take care of these. I mean, there's times where we're spending $1,000+ on properties to get them cleaned up. And that's what we spend.
Yeah,
Through the
that's
chair,
fair to
if I-
say. We just had one the other day where it was about $900 to clean out the backyard.
Yeah, through the chair.
Sure, I'm sorry.
Well, he was first, so.
Okay.
Go ahead,
I
Steve.
don't-
And going back to what Councilman Murphy says, you know, most of us here went to the 5-year plan at the community center on the vision for the city. And when we left, we all put a little dot on where the most concern was. And if I'm not mistaken, and that's a matter of record, it was blight. Plain and I don't care whether it's a house or the grass or dog feces or whatever, it was blight. Plain and simple. I mean, that was a top. I don't care about restaurants or the branding, it was blight. Plain and simple. And I keep saying that because that's what's coming back to we spent all that money, which was a small fortune to do that vision thing we did, and it was blight. And most of us were there. I mean, it's not something that we don't all be aware of. And the trouble is, for the last 5 years I've been on council, we've talked about this issue, about the grass cutting or the snow or the abandoned cars or whatever you want to talk about it. 5 years. I mean, granted, we went through emergency manager, and let's put a little history here, and we had some problems with money, and now we're getting money. But we got to do something. I mean, this thing about waiting, and appreciate what the city manager says about throwing somebody there and all that, but something's got to be done somewhere, okay? I cannot believe the fact that if somebody goes on vacation, nobody fills in. I'm sorry, I have a real hard time with that, okay? Because that job doesn't go away, okay? Because if the person that did my check and the rest of our checks here went on vacation and nobody took her place, nobody get paid. And that sure as heck don't happen. And I'm not putting that as being a smart person or a smart remark, but I'm saying that we need to that's why we're having the study session, or whatever you call it. We need to seriously look at some of the issues that we've been dealing with for a long time. We have some high seniority people in the ordinance. They have vacation, and they get sick. It's a fact of life, okay? And to not have somebody take their place means that exactly the example I give, okay? And we've been dealing with that for 5 years. It hasn't changed any, okay? And we're not up and ready to go to the building department plan of doing what we discussed when we brought McKenna in here. So what I'm suggesting is that we either go forward with this or we quit having these sessions about blight, because we already know what the issue is. And thank you for the time.
Councilman Higgins?
Yeah, I was just going to say basically the same thing. But I want the city manager to come forward with an emergency plan, because this is something that happens every year. We know when the warm weather comes. We know what's coming. So if we realize we have man off, God forbid because he's hurt or for whatever reason, and we're not going to be able to do the job, then I want the city manager to come to the council and say, okay, this is the plan. This is what we can do. And I would like something to be said.
Mr. Mayor, through the chair.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
So you say nobody does the job when somebody's off on vacation or off sick?
No, I don't know where that came from. That people do the job, it's just, if there's someone off, there's always somebody in to do the job. This kind of just got snowballed into nothing gets done, but that's not what happens.
So if Doris is
Let me
off for a
finish,
week,
sir.
somebody does answer the phone?
Yes, so when Doris is off, each officer takes a turn. They'll come in and check the messages. They'll fill out the forms in the morning. That's the first thing they do, and then the forms get filled out, calls get sent out. If Officer Manchester is off, and then the other two officers, they'll rotate through the calls. They just take as many as they can. I mean, it's not that things don't get done. Things are getting done. You're just not going to have as much done, obviously, with two than you would have three. So you're acting like nothing is done and the shop is closed and we're putting chains on the door. That's not exactly what happens. They're out there. They're doing as much as they can when they're shorthanded.
Who oversees, say a call comes in from the city manager about a complaint where grass was too tall, maybe should have been cut, wherever. Who does the investigation on that for the department?
If it should have been cut and it was never cut?
Yeah, if there's a sticker on the door already for Pride and it's been 10, 12 days, and then a complaint comes in that, why hasn't this been done?
We look
does
at
that
those right away.
investigation?
So if it's a call comes in, it's a complaint, and if we look it up, I look it up, or if the deputy chief or patrol lieutenant looks it up and says, the officer was out there, we'll contact what's going on with it. We address those right away.
Okay, but it's one of you three that does it when it comes in.
Yes, sir.
So all three of you oversee the operation of the Pride?
Yes.
Okay, I want to finish.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So what do you suggest? We need a training or more policies to set up to do it the right way? Because I've seen stickers on doors for 3 months and something hasn't been done.
Well, you're saying you're seeing stickers that have never been taken off, or work that's never been done for 3
Work
months?
has never been done.
I haven't got a complaint about that. That's haven't been done in 3 months.
I've seen them. And I can go back in ordinance files and show that they were written up in like the 4th month, and it's the 6th month, and they're still not done.
Okay, well, if you have the specifics, then bring them to the attention of the chief and one of the three.
Yeah,
will
absolutely.
do the
If you
investigation.
have a house that you've complained about and it was 3 months ago, so you're talking in April and it hasn't been cut since then, I'd like to see that. We'll take care of it right away.
It's already been taken care of. But
Okay.
when we wrote to the city last year, we wrote it up, and nothing was done. It was state tagged then.
Last year.
Spring, it just, just mushroomed. It just snowballed. Nothing got done in that house.
Your Honor, if I may,
You all set?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
I have another question. With the follow-ups, at that 7th day when, or whatever day they go back to do their follow-up, the ordinance officer, let's say they cannot get into the yard, what happens then?
Well, that's something that we've changed in the last couple of years, that they can't get in the yard, and the contractor can't get in. This is something that back years ago wasn't being done. We're actually doing search warrants for the house. We'll cut the fence open if we have to, and we go in and take care of it.
Through the chair, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I just want to clarify on something. I don't think the point I was making, Chief, was that it's not getting done. My point is, if you have 755 complaints, and you're having a hard time getting those because we have other complaints, and you've got 3 people working 6 days a week or 5 days a week, 40 hours, and then you get 1 person off, that means statistically you're going to be missing. It's just the way it is. I mean, and that's what I was getting at, is the point that if you have work for somebody for that amount of time and we're still behind because of the season, then if you have 1 or 2 people off, I don't care how hard that 3rd person works, unless they're Superman, they're not going to get the 2 other people's work done. And that's my point. And it wasn't about nobody not doing nothing. And if it was meant it that way, I take that back, because that's not what I said. But my point was, you got 3 people and you're down to 1, there's definitely a discrepancy. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Anything further from council? Okay. At that particular point, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second. Support.
Clerk, call the roll.
Councilman Darzinski?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Kelsey?
Yes.
Murphy?
Yes.
Parkinson?
Yes.
Mayor Carnes?
Yes.
How about me?